Tom lived in a small but tidy neighborhood, where the houses were built close to each other and the streets were always neat. The homeowners took pride in keeping their lawns trimmed, their fences painted, and their windows shining. At first glance, it looked like a peaceful place where nothing ever went wrong. The roads were lined with trees that gave shade in the summer, and in the evenings children played on the sidewalks while parents talked near their driveways. It was the kind of place where people waved to each other every morning and liked to show visitors that their community was well managed. Tom's house stood near the middle of the block. It was not the biggest or the fanciest house, but it was well cared for. Tom was different from many of his neighbors in one important way. He believed in saving energy and protecting the environment. A year earlier, he had spent a good part of his savings to install solar panels on his roof. They were dark and shiny, and when the sun rose, they absorbed light and turned it into power. Tom was proud of them because they did more than just lower his bills. With his neighbors' approval, he had connected those panels to a system that powered the streetlights, the small gate at the entrance of the neighborhood, and even the security cameras that watched over the streets. Everyone benefited from his choice, though some people did not fully understand how important the panels were. For many residents, the panels were just strange, dark shapes on Tom's roof. They did not know how much effort Tom had put into planning, or how carefully he had worked to make sure the system was reliable. He was the kind of person who believed that little changes could help a whole community, and his panels were his way of giving something back. Most people appreciated him. When the sun went down and the streetlights turned on, the families felt safe walking their dogs or letting their children ride bicycles. At night, when people drove back from work, the lights guided them home. The security cameras added another layer of comfort. If someone strange entered the neighborhood, the cameras recorded it. Once, when a package had gone missing from a porch, the cameras had captured the moment and the police had been able to return the package to its owner. For that reason alone, many residents felt grateful for Tom's panels, yet not every person saw it that way. Karen, the head of the homeowners association, disliked the panels from the very first day. Karen believed that every house should look uniform. She wanted roofs without any extra shapes or colors. In her mind, the panels ruined the harmony of the street. She often said to her friends that the dark rectangles made Tom's house look out of place. Karen was strict when it came to rules. She liked to send letters reminding people to mow their lawns or to repaint their fences. She walked around the neighborhood with a clipboard, making notes about any small detail that seemed out of order. For her, the neighborhood's beauty was a matter of pride, and she thought of herself as the guardian of that beauty. When she looked at Tom's roof, she did not see progress or safety. She only saw what she called a stain. At first, Karen complained politely. She asked Tom if he would consider moving the panels to the backyard, where they would not be visible. Tom explained kindly that the panels needed sunlight, and the backyard did not receive enough. He also explained that the panels were not just for him, but for the entire neighborhood. Karen nodded but remained unconvinced. Over time, her complaints grew louder. At community meetings, she would raise the issue again and again. She claimed the panels lowered the value of nearby houses. Some neighbors disagreed with her openly, pointing out that the panels saved money and gave security. Others stayed quiet because they did not want to argue. Tom tried not to let the tension bother him. He focused on keeping the system running smoothly, cleaning the panels regularly and checking the wires. He believed that eventually everyone would see their true worth. Tom was not the kind of man who liked conflict. He lived alone, worked in a local office, and spent his free time reading or fixing small things around the house. He was patient, friendly, and always ready to help a neighbor. When children lost their ball in his yard, he would bring it back with a smile. When an elderly neighbor needed help carrying groceries, Tom was there. These small acts made him well liked, but with Karen, nothing seemed to soften her dislike. As the months passed, the panels became a symbol in the neighborhood. For many, they stood for safety and comfort. For Karen, they stood for disorder and ugliness. She felt her authority as head of the association was being ignored. She had tried letters, she had tried warnings, and she had even threatened fines, but none of it had worked because the community by vote had allowed Tom to keep his panels. Each failed attempt made her more determined. One warm afternoon, as Tom was adjusting the angle of the panels for better sunlight, Karen walked by with her clipboard. She stopped, looked up at the roof, and shook her head. "It ruins the look of this street," she muttered, though Tom pretended not to hear. He knew another argument would solve nothing. Karen walked on, but the thought stayed with her. Later that night, Karen sat at her dining table looking out of her window at Tom's house. Even in the dark, the panels seemed to bother her. She imagined how beautiful the street would look if all the roofs matched. The thought grew stronger until she convinced herself that she had to do something. She told herself it was her duty as head of the association. She told herself that Tom would thank her one day for restoring the order of the street. What she did not realize was that her dislike of the panels blinded her to their true purpose. She never asked how the streetlights worked. She never wondered how the cameras stayed on. She only saw the panels as an obstacle to her idea of beauty. While Karen's frustration built, Tom remained unaware of how far she was willing to go. He believed the worst that could happen was more complaints. He did not imagine that someone would take direct action against the panels themselves. He trusted that reason would win in the end. The neighborhood continued with its daily rhythm. Children went to school, parents left for work, and in the evenings the familiar glow of the lights made the streets safe. People grew used to the comfort without thinking much about it. It had become part of life, like the trees that gave shade or the mailboxes that stood at the end of each driveway. They did not see the system behind it or the panels that worked silently each day, but Karen saw them every time she walked outside. They were a constant reminder that her will had not been followed. The more the rest of the neighborhood enjoyed the lights, the more determined she became. She began to think of a plan, one that would finally remove the dark shapes from Tom's roof. She did not share this plan with anyone, not even her closest neighbors. She kept it in her thoughts, waiting for the right moment. In her mind, it was simple. If the panels could not be removed by rule, then they could be made invisible by other means. She convinced herself that she was protecting the beauty of the community. She believed her action would be for the greater good, and so, while Tom continued his peaceful routine, reading in the evenings and cleaning his panels on weekends, Karen prepared for a choice that would change the neighborhood in ways she had not imagined. The stage was quietly set for a conflict that would bring light to some truths and shadow to others. Karen woke up early on a bright Saturday morning. The sun was shining and the air was clear, but she was restless. While most people were preparing for a relaxing weekend, she was thinking about Tom's panels again. Every time she stepped outside and looked down the street, her eyes went straight to his roof. She could not stop herself. The shiny black panels seemed to catch the sunlight in a way that made them stand out even more, at least to her. For weeks, she had been thinking about how to solve what she believed was the neighborhood's greatest problem. She had written letters. She had given warnings. She had even tried to gather votes against Tom, but most neighbors either ignored her or quietly sided with him. Karen could not accept defeat. She told herself that leaders never give up. She told herself that if she wanted to keep the neighborhood beautiful, she had to act. That morning, as she walked around her living room with a cup of coffee, an idea grew stronger in her mind. If she could not force Tom to remove the panels, then she could make them disappear in another way. The thought made her nervous at first, but she reminded herself that she was protecting the neighborhood. She thought about paint. If the panels were covered with a color that matched the roof, then they would no longer stand out. She believed that would solve everything. Karen's plan sounded simple in her head. She would hire a painter she trusted, someone who would not ask too many questions. The painter would climb up to Tom's roof, apply a coat of paint, and make the panels blend with the rest of the house. She convinced herself that Tom might even thank her one day for making the roof look better. In truth, she never considered asking him. She had already decided that her opinion was the only one that mattered. The following week, Karen began making calls. She spoke to a few workers she knew, men who often painted fences and houses in the area. She asked casual questions at first about prices and about schedules. Finally, she found one man who agreed to come on short notice. His name was Mark. He was not part of the neighborhood, which suited her well, because she did not want anyone talking about her plan before it was done. Mark arrived on a Wednesday morning with his ladder and his supplies. Karen met him outside, standing near the sidewalk, pointing toward Tom's house. She explained that she wanted the panels to be painted in a color that matched the roof tiles. Mark frowned slightly but said nothing. He had painted many unusual things before, and for him this was just another job. Karen paid him in advance to make sure there would be no delay. That day, Tom was away at work. His car was not in the driveway and the street was quiet. Karen felt the moment was perfect. She watched nervously as Mark carried his ladder and leaned it against the side of the house. He climbed carefully, carrying a bucket of paint and a roller. The sound of metal against the roof echoed slightly, but no one came outside to see what was happening. From the ground, Karen watched as Mark began rolling the paint over the panels. The dark, reflective surfaces slowly disappeared under the dull color of roof paint. With each stroke, the panels lost their shine. Karen felt a strange kind of pride rising in her chest. In her eyes, the house already looked better. The panels no longer caught the sunlight. They blended with the roof just as she had imagined. The work took less than an hour. Mark came down, packed his things, and collected his remaining payment. Karen thanked him and promised not to mention his name to anyone. She believed secrecy was important, at least for the moment. She wanted people to notice the change on their own and admire the improvement. She imagined her neighbors thanking her for taking action when no one else would. When Tom returned later that evening, the sun was already low. At first, he did not notice the panels. He parked his car, carried his bag inside, and prepared dinner. It was only when he stepped outside to water his plants that he looked up and saw the roof. His eyes widened. The panels no longer reflected the light. They were covered in dull paint, blending into the tiles. For a moment, he stood frozen. He could not believe what he was seeing. Tom rushed inside to check his system. He opened the control box and looked at the readings. The numbers were far lower than they should have been. The panels were no longer absorbing sunlight the way they were designed to. His heart sank. He knew at once that someone had interfered. He had spent months setting up the system, and in a single day it had been ruined. The next morning, Tom tried to clean a section of one panel, but the paint clung tightly to the surface. It was not a thin layer that could be wiped away. It had been applied firmly, meant to last. He realized that the entire system was in danger. Without sunlight, the panels could not provide enough energy. The street lights, the cameras, even the gate would begin to fail if the problem was not fixed. Meanwhile, Karen felt satisfied. She walked past Tom's house with a smile, looking up at the roof. To her, it looked perfect now. She expected people to notice soon. She imagined someone would say the street looked cleaner and more uniform. But when she spoke to her neighbors that day, no one mentioned it. Some did not even notice. Karen grew impatient. She began bringing it up herself, saying, "Doesn't Tom's house look better now that those shiny things are gone?" Most people looked at her with confusion. A few asked what she meant. Karen realized that many had not even been bothered by the panels in the first place. Her excitement faded slightly, but she held on to the belief that she had done the right thing. She told herself it was only a matter of time before everyone saw it her way. By evening, however, something unusual happened. As the sun went down, the street grew darker than usual. The familiar glow of the streetlights did not appear. The gates at the entrance of the neighborhood stopped moving. The cameras that usually blinked with small red lights were off. People stepped outside, puzzled by the sudden change. Parents held their children close. Drivers struggled to park without the guiding light. Whispers spread quickly. "Why are the lights off? What happened to the cameras? Is there a power cut?" Neighbors began gathering on the sidewalks, looking around with concern. Tom came outside carrying a flashlight. He explained what had happened. He told them that someone had painted over the solar panels, blocking the sunlight and shutting down the system that powered their security. Gasps filled the group. People were shocked. They had never realized the panels were so important. Some turned their eyes toward Karen, who stood quietly at the edge of the crowd. She felt a cold weight in her stomach. She had never imagined the panels did all that. But Tom did not accuse her directly. He only said, "We need to fix this before the whole system is damaged." His calm tone surprised everyone, but it also showed how serious the problem was. Neighbors began talking among themselves, worried about the safety of their homes without lights or cameras. Children asked if it was safe to play outside anymore. The comfort they had always taken for granted was gone, and fear was slowly taking its place. Karen said nothing that night. She went home quickly, her mind spinning. She had thought she was protecting the beauty of the neighborhood, but instead she had brought darkness. For the first time, she doubted herself. Tom, meanwhile, stayed awake late into the night thinking about what he could do. He knew the paint would not come off easily. He would need help, perhaps even professionals who could restore the panels. But more than that, he wondered how his neighbors would react once they knew who was responsible. The plan that Karen believed would bring peace had only brought trouble. The neighborhood was no longer safe, and the tension that spread through the streets was heavier than ever. What had once been a quiet and friendly place now felt uncertain. And while Karen tried to hide her fear, she knew deep inside that her secret would not stay hidden for long. The first night without lights was long and uneasy. The neighborhood that was usually bright and welcoming became quiet and tense. Without the glow of the streetlights, the trees cast long shadows across the roads. The sidewalks, which were often filled with children playing or people walking their pets, now seemed empty and silent. Windows lit up with the warm glow of lamps inside houses, but outside everything felt different. Neighbors who normally enjoyed sitting on their porches in the evening stayed indoors. Some peeked out from behind their curtains watching the dark streets with worry. The comfort they had grown used to was gone, and the sudden change made everyone uneasy. Tom walked carefully down the street, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. A few neighbors joined him carrying their own flashlights. They spoke in hushed voices about how strange it felt to be without the security system. Parents were concerned about their children. Elderly residents worried about walking outside. People who normally felt proud of their neighborhood now felt exposed. Tom stopped at the small box that controlled the system and checked it again. The numbers confirmed what he already knew. The panels were not producing enough energy because of the paint. Without sunlight reaching them, the whole system was almost powerless. He sighed and explained the problem again to the group around him. Without cleaning or replacing the panels, we cannot power the lights or the cameras, he said. The system depends completely on sunlight. Until the panels work again, everything will remain off. The neighbors listened carefully. Many had not realized how much they depended on Tom's panels until now. They remembered the times when the cameras had helped, or when the lights had guided them safely home. Some of them apologized to Tom for not supporting him more strongly before. Others looked around, whispering questions about who had done this. Karen was among them, standing at the edge of the group. Her hands were tight around her clipboard, though she had no reason to be holding it that night. Her face felt hot as people muttered. She had wanted the panels gone because of how they looked, but now she understood the cost of her decision. She had not expected the entire neighborhood to fall into darkness. Tom noticed her silence but said nothing. He was more focused on finding a solution than on pointing blame. He knew that accusing someone without proof would only create more division. Instead, he told everyone to be patient. He promised to contact professionals the next day to see what could be done to restore the panels. That night, many families left extra lights on inside their houses. Some placed lanterns in their yards to provide at least a little glow, but it was not the same. The dark streets felt unfriendly, and every sound seemed louder. Dogs barked more than usual. Cars drove slower, their headlights the only source of light on the road. Children asked their parents if the darkness was dangerous. Parents tried to calm them, but they shared the same unease. By morning, the whole neighborhood was talking about the blackout. Groups of neighbors gathered near the mailboxes, discussing the situation. Some blamed the city at first, thinking maybe the main power lines had failed. But Tom explained again that the streetlights and cameras were not powered by the city grid. They were connected to his panels, which had been damaged. His calm explanation helped some, but others still demanded answers. One man named Paul spoke up loudly. If the panels were painted, then someone must have done it on purpose.
Who would do such a thing?
A woman named Mary agreed. We all knew the panels were important. Why would anyone interfere with them? This affects all of us. Karen stood nearby, listening to every word. Her heart pounded. She had wanted people to see the neighborhood as prettier, but instead they were frightened and upset. She wanted to speak, but she was afraid of what would happen if she admitted the truth. Tom did not reveal his suspicions. He only said, "What matters now is fixing the problem. I will call experts today. They may be able to remove the paint or replace the damaged parts." The neighbors nodded. Some offered to help pay for repairs. Others suggested organizing a group to watch the streets at night until the lights returned. The sense of community was still strong even in the face of trouble. But the trust that once united them now carried cracks. People wondered quietly about who was responsible, and some began watching each other with suspicion. Later that day, Tom made several phone calls. He spoke to companies that specialized in solar panels, explaining the situation. Some told him it would be difficult to remove the paint without damaging the surface. Others said it might be possible, but it would take time and cost a lot of money. Tom felt the weight of the problem pressing down on him. He had taken responsibility for the system, and now the entire neighborhood depended on him again. That evening, the second night without lights began. The feeling of unease deepened. People locked their doors earlier than usual. Some carried flashlights even for short walks to the driveway. The darkness had turned familiar streets into something unfamiliar. Children whispered about monsters, though their parents reminded them that it was only shadows. Adults, however, knew that the real danger was the absence of security. On the corner of the block, an elderly couple named George and Anna spoke with Tom. They told him how much the lights had meant to them, especially when walking home from the park in the evenings. Without them, they felt trapped inside their house after dark. Tom listened kindly, assuring them he would do everything possible to restore the system. As the night stretched on, Karen sat by her window, staring out into the black street. The silence outside felt heavier than usual. She could see faint beams of flashlights as neighbors moved cautiously. She thought about the moment when she had watched the panels being painted. She had felt proud then, convinced she was helping. Now that memory burned inside her, filling her with regret. She tried to convince herself that she could keep the secret. After all, no one had seen her higher mark. No one had proof. But the weight of guilt grew stronger each time she heard a child cry out in fear of the dark, or each time she saw neighbors struggling to walk safely outside. She wondered how long she could keep silent. On the third day, things became even worse. A delivery van almost hit a dog that ran into the street because the driver could not see clearly. The incident scared everyone. People began saying more firmly that the panels had to be restored quickly. Some demanded answers from Tom, asking if he had discovered who had done it. Tom shook his head. He still refused to point fingers, but he could feel the tension building around him. That afternoon, a group of neighbors gathered in front of his house. They asked if they could help clean the panels themselves. Tom thanked them, but explained that the paint was not something that could be removed with simple tools. It needed professional work, or the panels might break completely. The neighbors left, but their worry remained. Karen stayed inside, listening through her open window. She wanted to speak up, to admit what she had done, but fear kept her silent. She imagined the anger on her neighbors' faces. She imagined losing her position as head of the association. She told herself that maybe Tom would solve it soon, and then everything would go back to normal. But deep down, she knew the truth would not stay hidden forever. That night, the third without light, the neighborhood felt even more fragile. Parents stood watch outside their homes, flashlights in hand. Groups of teenagers whispered nervously while walking together, afraid to be alone. The sense of unity that once made the neighborhood strong was being tested like never before. And as the stars shone coldly above, Tom looked at his dark panels with a heavy heart. He knew they could be repaired, but he also knew that someone close to him had caused this. He wondered what kind of neighbor could bring such harm in the name of beauty. He did not know yet that the answer was much closer than he imagined. Sitting quietly in a nearby house, weighed down by guilt and fear. The fourth morning after the blackout began with heavy clouds in the sky. The air felt tense, as if the whole neighborhood was waiting for something to happen. People were tired from restless nights. Tired of walking in the dark streets and tired of feeling unsafe in a place that had once been peaceful. The absence of light had changed the mood of everyone. Tom stepped outside early, carrying a notebook where he had written down the numbers from his solar system. He was determined to find a solution that day. He had already spoken to 2 companies who promised to send specialists to inspect the panels. But until they arrived, he wanted to test a small section on his own. He carefully climbed a ladder with a gentle cleaning solution and a soft cloth. When he reached the roof, he knelt beside one of the panels and tried rubbing the corner. The paint did not come off easily. It stuck firmly as if it had been applied with purpose. He tried a different method with warm water, but the result was the same. The surface remained dull and blocked the sunlight. Tom sighed heavily. He climbed down, his mind troubled. By now, word of the blackout had spread beyond the neighborhood. Visitors from nearby areas noticed the darkness at night. A few people even asked if something dangerous had happened. The neighborhood that had once been admired for its safety and order now looked weak. This made the residents even more anxious. That afternoon, a group of neighbors gathered at the small park. They wanted answers. Paul, who was always outspoken, raised his voice. Someone did this on purpose. Panels do not paint themselves. We need to know who is responsible. Mary nodded firmly. This is not only about one house. This is about all of us. Whoever painted those panels put our children, our families, and our homes at risk. We cannot ignore this, people murmured in agreement. For days they had kept their anger quiet, but now frustration was growing. They looked at Tom, waiting for him to say something. Tom stood calmly. He explained again what he knew. The paint was applied carefully. This was not an accident. I do not know who did it, but I know why we are all suffering now. The panels provided power for the lights and the cameras. Without them, we are exposed. The crowd listened, nodding slowly, but the question hung in the air. Who did it? Karen stood among them, her heart beating fast. She could feel the eyes of her neighbors moving around, searching for a guilty face. She lowered her gaze, clutching her clipboard tightly. She had never felt so small before. For years, she had walked proudly as head of the association, giving instructions and making rules. Now she could barely meet the eyes of the people she had once commanded. The meeting ended with no answers. People returned to their homes, still uneasy. But a seed of suspicion had been planted. Some began whispering to each other, wondering who could have wanted the panels gone. A few even remembered how often Karen had complained about them. Though no one spoke her name aloud, she felt the weight of those whispers pressing against her. That night, the 4th without lights, the air was heavier than ever. Clouds covered the moon, leaving the streets in deeper darkness. A group of neighbors decided to patrol together, carrying lanterns and sticks for safety. Tom joined them, walking at the front. As they moved through the streets, their footsteps echoed in the silence. Halfway through the patrol, they heard a sound near the entrance gate. It was a soft metallic clink, like someone moving around. The group rushed forward and found 2 young men trying to push the gate open. Normally, the gate would have been locked and powered, but without electricity, it was weak. The men ran away as soon as they saw the patrol disappearing into the night. The neighbors stood in shock. For the first time, they realized what Tom had warned them about. Without the panels, the neighborhood was truly at risk. The security they had trusted was gone, and outsiders could take advantage of the darkness. People looked at Tom with gratitude, but also with more anger toward whoever had destroyed the panels. If the lights had been on, this would never have happened, Paul said loudly. We cannot live like this. By the next morning, the situation could no longer be ignored. The specialist Tom had called finally arrived. They climbed onto the roof, examined the panels carefully, and gave their judgment. The paint has sealed the surface, one of them explained. It will take days of careful work to remove it, and even then, some panels may be permanently damaged. Replacing them may be the faster option, but it will be expensive. Tom nodded sadly. He knew the truth. Repairing or replacing the panels would require money and time. But more than that, the neighborhood needed unity to face the challenge. He could not carry the burden alone. Later that afternoon, Tom gathered everyone again in the park. He explained what the specialist had told him. He gave them the choice. Either they would all contribute to fix the problem, or they would continue living in darkness. The neighbors agreed that they had no choice. They decided to raise funds together. Many offered to give money immediately. Others promised to contribute within the week. For the first time since the blackout began, there was a sense of hope, but the question of responsibility still burned quietly. Who had caused this disaster? Why had they done it? People whispered again, and once more their eyes turned toward Karen. She had not spoken much since the trouble began, and her silence looked suspicious. That evening, as Tom was locking up the park gate, he saw Karen waiting near the path. She looked pale and nervous. She took a step toward him and said softly, "Tom, I need to talk." Tom looked at her calmly. "Yes, Karen, what is it?" She hesitated. Her fingers tightened around her clipboard. For a moment she thought about staying silent again. But the memory of the dark nights, the frightened children, and the failed gate returned to her mind. She could no longer carry the weight. "It was me," she whispered. "I asked a painter to cover the panels. I thought it would make the neighborhood look better. I did not know how much they were needed. I made a mistake." Tom stayed silent for a long moment. He had suspected her, but hearing her admit it still struck him deeply. Finally, he said, "Karen, do you understand what you have done? Because of this, the whole neighborhood has suffered. People have felt unsafe in their own homes. Tears filled Karen's eyes. I thought I was protecting the neighborhood. I thought the panels were ugly. I never realized they powered the lights and the cameras. I was wrong, Tom sighed. The neighborhood trusted you as their leader, and instead of protecting them, you hurt them. This is not just about looks. This is about safety and trust. Karen lowered her head. I will accept whatever the community decides. I only ask for a chance to help repair what I have broken. The next day, Tom called another meeting and explained what Karen had confessed. The crowd grew restless. Many shouted in anger. Some demanded that Karen step down from the homeowners association. Others called her irresponsible. Karen stood quietly, accepting every word. Finally, Tom raised his hand. She has admitted her mistake. She will no longer lead the association. But she has also offered to help repair the damage. We can choose to stay divided, or we can choose to work together and restore our safety. The neighbors discussed among themselves. At last, they agreed that Karen would step down from her position immediately. She would also contribute money and effort to repair the panels. It was the only way to move forward. That night, though the streets were still dark, a new sense of unity began to grow. Neighbors spoke more kindly to each other, checking on one another's families. People felt stronger now that the truth was out. They knew the repair would take time, but they also knew they could face it together. Karen, sitting alone in her house, thought about what had happened. She had lost her title, but perhaps she had gained something more important. She had learned that true leadership was not about control or appearance. It was about care, trust, and responsibility. She silently promised herself that she would work harder to earn back even a little of the trust she had broken. And Tom, though tired, felt hopeful again. The panels could be repaired, the lights could return, and the neighborhood could once more be safe. But the lesson of those dark nights would never be forgotten. The following week began with a mix of worry and hope. The neighborhood was still dark at night, but now the people had a plan. Tom had scheduled the repair work, and neighbors had promised to contribute money and labor. Even Karen, who had confessed to her mistake, offered to give a large part of her savings to help. Though many still felt angry at her, they also knew that her contribution would make the repairs happen faster. Every morning, Tom updated the neighbors about the progress. The specialist had started carefully scraping the paint off the panels. Some sections responded well, but others were badly damaged. The workers explained that a few panels would need full replacement. Tom told the neighbors honestly how much it would cost and how long it would take. People nodded, understanding that the mistake had been serious, but also believing that they could fix it together. The community spirit grew stronger each day. Families who had rarely spoken to one another now shared meals. Parents took turns watching over the children while others met with the workers. Paul organized a group to walk the streets at night, ensuring no strangers tried to sneak in again. Mary and Anna baked bread and cookies for the volunteers. Even in the darkness, people found light through their unity. Karen, however, carried a heavier burden. She joined the repair team every day, helping lift equipment and bringing water to the workers. She no longer walked with her clipboard. Instead, she worked quietly, keeping her eyes down. Some neighbors ignored her. Others whispered harsh words when she passed. But she accepted it. She knew trust would not return quickly, and perhaps it never would. One afternoon, while the workers were on the roof, a group of children gathered near Tom's house. They asked questions about the panels. How do they make light? One boy asked. Tom smiled patiently and explained in simple words how the sunlight turned into energy. The children listened with wide eyes, amazed that something so silent and still could do so much. Their curiosity reminded the adults nearby of how valuable the panels truly were. That evening, as the sun set, Tom gathered everyone in the park. He wanted to speak openly before the final repairs began. He stood on a small bench so all could see him. His voice was calm but firm. We all saw what happened when the panels stopped working, he said. Our streets turned dark. We felt unsafe. We argued and worried. But we also learned something important. These panels are not just pieces of glass on my roof. They are a promise of safety for everyone. They protect our families, our homes, and our peace of mind. The neighbors listened carefully. Some nodded, remembering the fear of the dark nights. Others looked at Karen, their faces hard but thoughtful. Tom continued. We also learned that mistakes can hurt us deeply. But mistakes can also teach us. We must never forget that appearances are less important than safety. A roof may look neat, but without light and security, neatness means nothing. What matters is how we take care of one another. There was silence for a moment. Then Mary spoke. Tom is right. We depended on him and we took it for granted. We should not let that happen again. Paul added, and we should be careful about who we trust to make decisions for us. Beauty is not more important than safety. The crowd murmured in agreement. Karen lowered her head, feeling every word. The next few days passed with steady work. The damaged panels were replaced. The clean ones began to shine again under the sunlight. Slowly, the system came back to life. One afternoon, Tom checked the control box and smiled. The numbers had risen. Energy was flowing again. That evening, as the sky turned orange and then dark, the streetlights flickered on one by one. Cheers spread across the neighborhood. Children clapped their hands. Parents hugged their kids. The cameras blinked back to life. The gate moved smoothly again and the familiar glow returned to the streets. For the first time in many nights, people felt safe again. The celebration was small but heartfelt. Families brought out food to share in the park. People laughed and talked late into the night, enjoying the light that had once seemed so ordinary but now felt precious. Tom sat quietly at the edge, smiling as he watched everyone. For him, the reward was not the praise he received but the sight of his neighbors happy again. Karen attended the gathering too, though she kept her distance. She knew she was no longer trusted as a leader, but she also knew she had been given a chance to make amends. When a group of children ran past her, one little girl stopped and said, "Thank you for helping clean the panels." The simple words touched Karen deeply. She smiled, her eyes wet, and whispered, "You're welcome." In the following weeks, the neighborhood returned to its normal rhythm. The lawns were trimmed, the fences painted, and the streets once again filled with laughter in the evenings. But something had changed. People had learned to value what they once ignored. They knew now that safety was not guaranteed, that it depended on the quiet work of a system powered by sunlight and maintained with care. Tom continued to check the panels daily, but now he had help. Several neighbors offered to learn the basics so they could share the responsibility. The system was no longer seen as Tom's project alone. It became the neighborhood's treasure. Karen worked quietly in the background. She no longer led the association, but she offered ideas for community gardens, street cleanups, and small projects. Though many still did not fully forgive her, they allowed her to contribute. Trust was not easy to rebuild, but effort was noticed. Months later, when a storm hit the area, the neighborhood was ready. The panels held strong, and the lights stayed on even when the main city grid flickered. People cheered, proud of their resilience. They remembered the dark nights and how far they had come since then. On that stormy evening, Tom stood by his window, looking at the glowing streets. He felt a deep sense of peace. He knew the neighborhood had learned a lesson it would never forget. Beauty could fade, rules could change, but true strength came from unity, trust, and the power of light. Karen, sitting quietly in her own home, also looked out at the glowing streets. She thought about her mistake again, but this time she saw the outcome differently. The neighborhood was stronger now, and she had played a part, even if it began with failure. She whispered a promise to herself that she would never again put appearance above safety. The story of the dark nights was told many times after that. Parents reminded their children about it when they complained about chores. Neighbors mentioned it to visitors, explaining how important the panels were. And every time the lights flickered on at sunset, people smiled, remembering the nights when they had been gone. The panels had become more than just a source of energy. They were a reminder of what the neighborhood had endured and what it had learned. They stood proudly on Tom's roof, shining in the sunlight, no longer seen as ugly but as symbols of protection and unity. And so, the neighborhood moved forward, brighter and wiser than before.